Greetings! In this video, I'm going to be painting a veteran sergeant of the Ultramarines 9th Company. I originally had a different model planned for this video, but due to a Vallejo dropper bottle exploding on my desk, I have to strip that model now. This dude is going to be leading a Devastator squad, armed with las cannons. I used bodies from Tortuga Bay, and the sergeant himself is very customised. I think the only GW plastic on this model is the head, arms, and one pauldron. That one pauldron is from the Ultramarines Firstborn upgrade kit, which has some nice bits that can still be used on Primaris models. Anyway, I primed the model black and then sprayed it with Macragge Blue air through my airbrush. The first step for me was applying gloss varnishes to surface I planned to have decals on. This helps prevent the visible edge that can be left when applying transfers. While the gloss varnish was drying, I painted in the black details using Abaddon black air. I'm using the air version as it's pre-thinned and comes in a larger pot. The normal base paint version or Black Legion contrast paint would work equally well for this. Back to transfers. I cut out everything for the entire squad. Fire support tactical markings, a sergeant name marking, chapter badges, campaign badge, bit of text, and numerals. I then put a few drops of water on them. I applied microset to the surfaces, then applied the decals. I used a brush and the tip of a knife to adjust their positions. I would go on to paint other bits of the model, avoiding the decals for the time being, but when they dried, I applied microsol on a few coats, helping them form around the curved surfaces. I painted the pauldron trims next, and as the 9th Company are denoted by a light blue colour, I chose to use Lothan Blue. The 8th edition Codex has one of the best examples for Ultramarines paint schemes. As I'm doing a 9th Company veteran sergeant, I'll be doing the parts marked out here. I painted both pauldrons in a few light coats. My next step was to use Retributor armour for the gold details. The Imperialis, the power pack details like the skull and crux, and the text on the pauldron were painted. For the silver metallics I used Leadbelcher. The grenade, power pack details, weapon, and helmet details were base coated. Next I used Mephiston red. I painted in the helmet, the cables, and the skull on the pauldron which marks him as a sergeant. I followed the Mephiston red with Sunz Scarlet, highlighting the red bits. I switched to Ulthorn Grey for the Ultima glyph on the pauldron, and for the stripe denoting him as a veteran sergeant. Painting a stripe isn't easy, so I had to go back and clean up some of the red with Sunz Scarlet. The pauldrons are fairly busy, and I forgot to paint the halo, so I went back to Retributor armour for that. I also missed the optic and antenna details for the helmet, so I went back to Abaddon black for them. The eye lenses, I base coated them with Warpstone Glow, followed by a highlight of Moot Green. For the parchment, scrolls, and tactical rock, I used Steel Legion Drab. The leather was base coated with Rhinox hide, painting in the pouches. Then the wax was base coated with Screamer Pink. I then began highlighting all these details, starting with Pink Horror for the wax. Then Morghast Bone was used for the parchment, scrolls, and the rock, which I forgot to record. I switched to Scrag Brown to highlight the leather. As the paint dries on the brush, I use it to apply scratches. Deathclaw Brown finishes the highlights on the leather, applying it in roughly the same spots as before. Now for some washes. I used a dark grey wash over the silver metallics. And I used Seraphim Sepia to shade the gold. Now the long process of highlighting the blue with Calgar Blue. I painted in some rough edge highlights along pretty much every edge. This can take a fair bit of time, but I wasn't too worried about making mistakes. After hitting the edges, I went back in with Rhinox Hide and applied a bunch of chipping effects. Anywhere the edge highlighting looked bad, I just put some chips there to make it look intentional. I also applied the chips to the pauldron and helmet to help break up the solid colours. I went back to Evil Sunz Scarlet and painted in the wires on the Volkite caliver, as they were looking a bit dark. I then used some Wild Rider Red to edge highlight the helmet a bit. After that I switched to some white from SMS, and used it to brighten the Ultramarines. You can see a before and after here. I also used it to highlight the helmet stripe, applying then dots to act both as a highlight and a form of scratching. Back to the parchment, I used a 0.15mm micron pen to draw in some scribbles on the purity seal, and write some text on the scrolls. The footage here is sped up a fair bit. I messed up the one on the back, so I started over by wiping it with a finger. You can do that a few times before it darkens, and you need to paint over it again. Just don't get any water on the pen tip. I was happy enough with these though. For the Volkite caliver details, I used some Vallejo metallics. I started with Tinny Tin, base coating the muzzle and cooling coils. You could use Citadel's Balthazar Gold if you wanted instead, as it's similar. Next I used Hammered Copper, and covered all but the innermost parts of the Tinny Tin. This serves to smooth out the coloured finish. Citadel's Brass Scorpion might be a close match here, but there's a reason I'm using this brand instead. Finally, I used some Model Colour Copper, and did only the very edges. I just love the finish this gives. Screaming Bell might be a close match for this colour. I finished the weapon with a quick edge highlight with Eshin Grey. I also edge highlighted the helmet optic at the same time. I then moved on to pin wash. I used AK's Dark Sepia pin wash, as it doesn't add too much colour. I applied it over the rivets that I forgot to paint silver. Miraculously, I caught myself, and switched to Runefang Steel, dotting in the rivets on the armour, the power pack, the pauldrons, and the weapon. After that, I went back to the pin wash. I really do love the finish this gives. After I was happy with the application, I waited for it to fully dry, and applied the same basing method I used in my Stormspeeder video. And here we have it! An Ultramarines 9th Company Veteran Sergeant. This guy would have never been on the channel if it wasn't for that paint pot exploding over what I did have planned. The parts used here are an assortment of stuff I've collected over the past 2 years. so I apologise if you're looking to replicate some of the things I've done here. As for the paint job itself, this is a fairly typical example of how I paint my Ultramarines, though a bit more organised considering I usually go back and forth like crazy. Other than the paint alternatives I mentioned earlier, I do have some alternate methods I sometimes use. Instead of the edge highlighting of the blue, I sometimes do a heavy dry brush with Calgar Blue straight after the base coat of Macragge Blue, then cleaning up with Macragge Blue and continuing like usual. That method saves time later, but Calgar Blue really doesn't like being dry brushed, and it's fairly wasteful of the paint as a result. I also sometimes go over the gold after the Seraphim Sepia shade with either Auric Armour Gold for a more shiny finish, or recently Thalax Gold air paint, via a brush of course, which gives a similar finish to Gehenna's Gold but less red, if that makes sense. Maybe I should do a video trying out a bunch of gold recipes. Would you guys be interested in that? Anyway, that's all I have for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope you'll stick around for the next one.